I landed on Mysteries of the Night, one of those call-in shows where anonymous voices share their secrets into the darkness. The host was bantering with callers, creating a light-hearted atmosphere that filled my cabin. I barely paid attention until a familiar laugh cut through the static like a blade through silk. My stomach dropped. That laugh, I knew it intimately. The same laugh that greeted me every morning over coffee, the one that echoed through our house during Sunday brunches. Laura's laugh. I should feel guilty, she was saying, her voice carrying that playful lilt she used when sharing gossip with friends. But honestly, these nights are the most alive I've felt in years. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. This had to be a mistake, some cruel coincidence. But then she mentioned working in pediatrics, just like Laura. Still, I clung to denial. How many female pediatricians could be in our city? Dozens, surely. Then she mentioned Oliver. My cat always gives me away, she chuckled. He waits by the door when I come home late, meowing so loud he could wake the whole neighborhood. Oliver, our orange tabby who Laura had rescued 5 years ago. The same Oliver who slept at the foot of our bed every night. My world started spinning as she continued, each casual word shattering another piece of my reality. She described meeting her lover in the small Italian restaurant on Oak Street, where I had proposed to her. She laughed about the blue bedding she hated, the same sheets I'd bought for our anniversary last month. My husband works night shifts, she was saying, her voice light and carefree. He thinks I'm helping my sister move tonight. The exact words she'd said to me just hours ago, when she kissed me goodbye. The same sister who, I suddenly realized, had posted photos from her vacation in Florida this morning. I pulled the pickup to the shoulder of the road, my high beams cutting through the fog that had started to roll in. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone, desperate to record this nightmare. Not for revenge, not yet. But because some part of me knew that tomorrow, in the harsh light of day, I wouldn't believe this had been real. The host asked her how long this had been going on. 6 months? She replied, and I felt my chest constrict. 6 months. While I was working extra shifts to save for the surprise vacation I'd planned for our anniversary. While I was picking out paint colors for the nursery we talked about starting. While I was building a future on a foundation of lies. As I sat there in the darkness, listening to my wife casually dismantle our marriage for anonymous entertainment, something inside me hardened. The pain was still there, raw and burning, but beneath it, something colder was taking shape. Laura had no idea I was listening. No idea that her midnight confession had set events in motion that would change everything. In that moment, I made a decision. She wanted to turn our life into entertainment? Fine. But I would make sure the final act was one she'd never forget. The steering wheel creaked under my grip as Laura's voice continued floating through the radio. My wedding ring caught the dim light of the dashboard, a mockery of everything I thought we'd built together. 8 years of marriage, and she was turning it into late-night entertainment. I forced myself to breathe slowly, methodically, like I did during particularly complex construction projects. Each breath helped clear my mind, transforming raw pain into cold clarity. The fog had thickened around my pickup, creating a cocoon of isolation perfect for planning what needed to be done. First, I called Sarah, Laura's sister. My voice was surprisingly steady as I asked how the moving was going. There was a pause on the line, the kind that stretches like a rubber band about to snap. Moving? Sarah sounded genuinely confused. I'm in Tampa with the kids. Posted some beach photos this morning. Didn't Laura see them? I managed a laugh that felt like swallowing glass. Must have gotten my wires crossed. Sorry to bother you so late. After hanging up, I sat in silence, piecing together a puzzle I never wanted to solve. The late yoga classes on Thursdays. The new perfume she'd started wearing. The mysterious work meetings that always ran long. Each memory took on a different shape now, like shadows transforming at sunset. The radio show had moved on to other callers, but I'd recorded every second of Laura's confession. My trembling fingers opened our shared photo album on my phone. There she was, smiling at our anniversary dinner last month, wearing the necklace I'd saved 3 months to buy. The same night she'd said she was too tired for the movie I'd planned, claiming an emergency at the pediatric ward had drained her. I pulled up our joint account app. The transactions started jumping out at me. Small charges at times when she was supposedly at work, at places nowhere near the hospital. Coffee shops across town. A boutique hotel charged as a business lunch. Each piece of evidence was a small cut, precise and painful. My phone buzzed, a text from Laura. "Hope your shift is going well, honey. Sarah's place is such a mess. Miss you." I stared at those hearts she'd sent, my own turning to stone. She had no idea I knew. No idea that while she thought she was cleverly covering her tracks, she'd broadcast her betrayal across the night airwaves for anyone to hear. That's when the idea started taking shape. Laura had always loved being the center of attention, hosting dinner parties where she could hold court. How fitting it would be to give her exactly what she wanted, one final performance, with an audience she wasn't expecting. I opened my contacts, scrolling through names. Her parents, who'd welcomed me like a son. My closest friends from the construction company. Our neighbors, the Mitchells, who'd had us over for barbecues every summer. Even Mark from her hospital, who always seemed to know more than he let on about staff relationships. My fingers moved mechanically, sending out invitations for a surprise celebration for Laura this weekend. Each message felt like laying another brick in a wall that would soon come crashing down around her. The fog was starting to lift as dawn approached. I had 3 days to gather every shred of evidence, to turn her careful house of lies into kindling. 3 days to prepare a revelation that would show her exactly what it felt like to have your life turned into public entertainment. I started the pickups engine, my mind already mapping out what needed to be done. First stop, the bank, to pull records of every suspicious transaction. Then the boutique hotel she'd charged as a business lunch. After that, a visit to a friend who owed me a favor, one who happened to specialize in digital forensics. Laura wanted to play with fire? I would make sure she felt the burn of every bridge she torched. Her parents arrived first. Margaret, her mother, brought her signature apple pie, the same one she'd made for our wedding. Robert, her father, clasped my shoulder with the warmth he'd always shown his son-in-law. If only they knew what their daughter had done. The Mitchells came next, our neighbors of 7 years. Then Mike from my construction crew, and finally Dr. Anderson, the senior physician from Laura's hospital. Each guest arrived with smiles and questions about the surprise celebration I'd promised. I watched them settle into our furniture, making small talk, completely unaware they were about to become witnesses to the unraveling of a marriage. "I made coffee," I announced, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Why don't we start with a little entertainment while we wait for Laura?" The familiar living room felt surreal as I connected my phone to our TV. The same screen where we'd watched countless movies together, her head on my shoulder. Now it would show a very different kind of story. "Is this some kind of highlight reel?" Margaret asked warmly, settling into her favorite armchair. "You always were such a romantic, Alex." I managed a smile that felt like broken glass. "Something like that." The radio show's intro music filled the room. People were still chatting, wine glasses clinking. Dr. Anderson was telling a joke about hospital administration. Then Laura's voice cut through the pleasant atmosphere like a knife. "I should feel guilty." The change in the room was instant. Margaret's hand froze halfway to her mouth, the coffee cup trembling slightly. Robert leaned forward, his brow furrowed in confusion. The Mitchells exchanged glances, recognition dawning in their eyes. "That sounds like..." Mrs. Mitchell started, but fell silent as Laura's voice continued describing her affair. The room grew heavier with each revelation. When she mentioned Oliver, Margaret's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. At the description of the Italian restaurant, Robert's face darkened with understanding. Dr. Anderson's professional composure cracked as Laura casually mentioned meeting her lover during hospital shifts. "Turn it off," Margaret whispered, but I couldn't. They needed to hear it all. The silence in the room became oppressive as Laura's recorded voice described her perfect alibi, helping her sister move. Sarah, who everyone knew was in Florida. The lie hung in the air like poison gas. Robert stood up abruptly, his fists clenched. This has to be some kind of mistake. Some sick joke. That's when we heard it, the sound of a key in the front door lock. The very same door Laura had kissed me goodbye through 3 nights ago, promising she was going to help her sister move. Time seemed to slow down as the handle turned. The gathered audience sat frozen, like characters in a tableau, as the door began to open. Laura's voice was still playing from the TV, describing her lover's apartment, while the real Laura was about to step into a nightmare of her own making. The hinges creaked slightly, the same creak I'd been meaning to fix for months. Another small detail in a life that was about to shatter. Laura stepped into our living room like she had countless times before, her designer handbag, my Christmas gift, swinging carelessly from her shoulder. The expensive perfume she'd started wearing 6 months ago announced her presence before she even looked up. She was still wearing her scrubs, keeping up the pretense of a late hospital shift. The moment stretched like a thread about to snap. Her eyes swept across the room, taking in each familiar face, her mother clutching a half-empty coffee cup, her father standing rigid by the fireplace, our neighbors the Mitchells pressed together on the love seat, Dr. Anderson looking anywhere but at her. The confusion on her face lasted exactly 3 seconds before her own voice filled the room from the TV speakers. "These night shifts are perfect for us," her recorded voice purred. "My husband never suspects a thing." The color drained from Laura's face so quickly I thought she might faint. The handbag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the hardwood floor with a thud that echoed through the deathly silent room. Inside, something shattered, probably her favorite perfume bottle. The scent began spreading through the room, mixing with the tension in the air. This isn't. Laura's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. Her eyes darted to each face in the room, searching for an ally, finding none. Even Dr. Anderson, who had mentored her through residency, kept his gaze fixed on his shoes. Her recorded voice continued its carefree confession, describing intimate details of her betrayal. The same voice that had whispered, "I love you," to me every morning for 8 years now filled our living room with evidence of her deceit. "It's not what you think," she finally managed, but the words sounded hollow, automated like a customer service response. This is just a joke. A stupid radio show prank. Right, Alex?" She turned to me, attempting a laugh that came out more like a strangled sob. Margaret, her mother, pressed her hands against her face, wedding ring glinting in the evening light. The same ring Laura's father had saved for 6 months to buy, back when they were young and believed in forever. Robert stood from the couch, his face a storm of emotions. 40 years of marriage, and now he was watching his daughter destroy her own. "Laura." Her father's voice carried the weight of every Sunday dinner, every Christmas morning, every proud moment now tainted by this betrayal. "Tell me this isn't real." But the recording had reached the part where she described our Italian restaurant, the exact table where Robert had watched me propose to his daughter. Her voice gleefully recounted how she now shared our special place with another man. Mrs. Mitchell, who had hosted us for barbecues every summer, who had brought us soup when we both had the flu last winter, turned away with a soft, "Oh, Laura." The disappointment in her voice cut through the room like a blade. "Alex, please." Laura took a step toward me, then froze as her recorded voice described the blue bedding. She hated the sheets currently on our bed upstairs. "This isn't. We can explain this. I can explain everything." I stood absolutely still, watching her unravel. The woman who thought she was clever enough to fool everyone was now trapped in a web of her own making. And I hadn't even revealed the hotel receipts yet, or the text messages, or the security camera footage. "Can you explain why Sarah didn't know anything about helping her move?" Dr. Anderson's quiet question sliced through Laura's desperate pleading. "She called the hospital yesterday, wondering why you'd used her as an excuse for missing your shift." Laura's head snapped toward her mentor, betrayal flashing across her face. But Dr. Anderson wasn't finished. "The ethics board would be very interested in how you've been logging hours, Laura. Very interested indeed." I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate. The coffee table between us felt like an ocean, and Laura was drowning on her side of it. Her perfect mask was cracking, showing glimpses of panic underneath. "Well, Laura?" My voice came out softer than anyone expected, which somehow made the room even tenser. The recorded show continued playing in the background, a soundtrack to her unraveling life. She straightened her scrubs, a nervous habit I'd watched for 8 years. "This is ridiculous, Alex. It's just a stupid prank." Jenny from pediatrics thought it would be funny to call into these shows, make up stories. "We all did it. Ask her." Dr. Anderson shifted in his chair. "Jenny transferred to Boston General 3 months ago, Laura." The lie hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Laura's mother let out a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Fine, it wasn't Jenny. It was—" Laura's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. "It doesn't matter who it was. This is just a misunderstanding. You're all taking this way too seriously." I reached for my phone, pulling up the text messages I'd saved. "You said you were helping Sarah move tonight. Interesting timing." I turned to our gathered witnesses. "Should we call Sarah? She's probably enjoying the beach in Tampa right now. Posted some lovely sunset photos this evening." Laura's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Shock, fear, calculation, then an attempt at righteous anger. "You're checking up on me? Tracking my sister's social media? This is insane, Alex." "No, what's insane is that you were at Mark Davidson's apartment on Carlton Street while everyone thought you were helping your sister." I kept my voice level, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Apartment 3B to be exact. The same apartment you've been visiting every Thursday night for the past 6 months." The color drained from Laura's face. Behind her, Dr. Anderson's professional composure cracked slightly. He knew Mark had probably recommended him for the position at the hospital. "You don't." Laura started, but I wasn't finished. I pulled out a manila envelope, watching her eyes lock onto it like a snake watching prey. "The doorman at Carlton Apartments has an excellent memory, Laura, and an even better security camera system. Would you like to see the timestamps of your visits? Or should we start with the footage first?" "This is a violation of privacy." She took a step forward, reaching for the envelope, but stopped when her father cleared his throat. "Privacy?" Robert's voice was thick with emotion. "You want to talk about privacy while we're listening to you broadcast your affair on public radio?" Laura spun toward her father, desperation clear in her voice. "Daddy, please, this isn't what it looks like. Alex is twisting everything. He's trying to make me look bad because what, Laura?" I asked quietly. "Because I worked night shifts to save for our future? Because I trusted you? Because I believed you when you said you were working late, helping your sister, attending medical conferences?" Mrs. Mitchell, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "I saw you, Laura, last Thursday at that new cafe downtown. You were with a man and it wasn't Alex. You looked intimate. I told myself I must be mistaken, that there had to be an explanation. I didn't want to believe." Laura's facade cracked further. "Mrs. Mitchell, that was a work lunch, a completely professional." "You were holding hands," Mrs. Mitchell continued softly, "and when you kissed him goodbye, it didn't look professional at all." I pulled out my tablet, the screen already cued to the security footage. "You remember this camera, don't you, Laura? The one in the lobby of our building? Last week, when Mrs. Peterson's package went missing, we watched the footage together. You even commented on how clear the new HD system was. The familiar lobby of our apartment building appeared on the TV screen, replacing the radio show. The timestamp read 3:27 a.m. Laura's mother leaned forward, squinting at the image, while Dr. Anderson adjusted his glasses. "You told me you were working a double shift that night," I continued, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Funny thing about hospital shifts, they keep records. Very detailed records." The footage showed Laura entering the lobby, but she wasn't wearing scrubs. Instead, she wore a black cocktail dress I'd never seen before, her hair styled differently than when she'd left for work that morning. The camera caught her checking her reflection in the lobby mirror, adjusting her dress, wiping something from the corner of her mouth. That could be anyone, she protested weakly, but we all saw her unconsciously touch her pearl necklace, the same one she was wearing in the footage. The timestamps are interesting, I continued, advancing the footage.
3:27 nachts entering.
But according to the exit log, you left at 7 p.m. claiming to start your shift. That's 8.5 hours unaccounted for. 8.5 hours when you were supposed to be saving lives in the pediatric ward. Dr. Anderson cleared his throat. Laura, we had no pediatric emergencies that night. The ward was quiet. I know because I was on call. Her father stood up abruptly, his coffee cup clattering to the floor. No one moved to clean up the spill. 8 hours? Where were you for 8 hours? I changed the tablet's display to a map. Find My Phone is an interesting feature, isn't it? Especially when you share an Apple ID account with your spouse. Would you like to see where your phone was during those 8 hours, Laura? Or should I ask Mark's wife about the hotel they renovated near the airport? Laura's eyes widened at the mention of Mark's wife. Helen? What does she have to do with this? Everything, a new voice said from the doorway. We all turned to see Helen Davidson standing there, her own tablet in hand. Did you really think I wouldn't notice my husband's changed passwords? His secret email account? The credit card statements he thought he'd hidden? Laura staggered backward, bumping into the bookshelf where we kept our family photos. A frame fell, the glass cracking our wedding picture, now fractured right between our smiling faces. Helen, Laura whispered, this isn't what you think. Really? Helen's voice was arctic. Then let me show everyone what I found on Mark's laptop last night. The emails, the hotel receipts, the plans you two made. She looked at me. Alex, would you like to know what they were planning to do with your money? Speaking of hotels, I said, pulling another envelope from my briefcase. I've been doing some interesting reading about our joint account activities. The bank statements rustled as I laid them on the coffee table, each page highlighted with yellow markers, dots of color marking each betrayal. Laura's eyes fixed on the papers like they were venomous snakes. Her mother leaned forward, squinting at the upside-down numbers, while Helen moved closer, her own evidence still clutched to her chest. The Oakwood Hotel and Spa, I read aloud, my voice eerily calm. You said you were having a girls' day with Jenny and Sarah. Cucumber masks, seaweed wraps, the works. Cost me $300. I looked up at her. Funny thing though, when I called the spa to get a receipt for our tax returns, they had no record of any treatments that day. I must have mixed up the dates, Laura stammered, her manicured fingers twisting the pearl necklace I'd given her for our 5th anniversary. They did, however, I continued as if she hadn't spoken, have a record of a deluxe suite booking. Room 412. Signed for by Laura Collins. I slid the hotel receipt across the coffee table. Her signature, usually so precise and professional, looked hurried, almost guilty on the paper. That's not. Laura's voice cracked. That could be anyone's signature. Helen stepped forward, her tablet screen glowing. Really, Laura? Because I have Mark's credit card statement right here. Same hotel, same day, same room number. He claimed it was a medical conference. Guess he forgot hospitals usually pay for those directly. Dr. Anderson cleared his throat. There was no conference that week, Laura. You both called in sick. Laura's father picked up the hotel receipt, his hands shaking. I taught you to write your signature, remember? Used to practice it together before you started medical school. That little curl on the L. That's definitely yours, honey. The room service bill is interesting too, I added, pulling out another paper. Champagne, strawberries, your favorite chocolate truffles from the hotel's specialty menu. The same ones you said were, and I quote, too expensive when we stayed there for our anniversary last year. Mrs. Mitchell stood up suddenly. I saw you that day, Laura. In the hotel lobby. I was there for my nephew's wedding reception. You were wearing that red dress you bought for the hospital fundraiser. I called out to you, but you rushed into the elevator without even looking back. I convinced myself you must have been there for work. You didn't just betray Alex. Helen cut in, her voice sharp. You betrayed everyone in this room. While you and Mark were playing your little games, charging expensive hotels and restaurants, planning your future together, did you ever think about the people you were hurting? Laura's face had gone from pale to ashen. Helen, please. Please what? Please don't tell them about the emails where you and Mark planned your new life together? Please don't mention how you laughed about fooling everyone? Or please don't show them the messages where you discussed how to maximize what you could take from both our accounts before running away together. The room fell silent except for Margaret's soft crying. Laura stood frozen, her perfect world crumbling around her, as I reached for the final piece of evidence in my briefcase. I lifted Laura's tablet from my briefcase, the rose gold iPad I'd given her for Christmas. She'd always been so protective of it, never letting me use it, claiming patient confidentiality. Now I knew the real reason. You were always so careful with your passwords, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. But last Tuesday you were in such a hurry to meet Mark, you forgot to log out of Messenger. Oliver knocked the tablet off the coffee table while you were gone. When I picked it up, Laura lunged forward suddenly, reaching for the tablet, but Helen stepped between us. Let them see, Laura. Let them all see who you really are. I connected the tablet to our TV, and the messages filled the screen. Laura's mother, who had been quietly crying, looked up, then immediately wished she hadn't. Can't wait to leave these boring nights behind, Laura had written. Alex is so clueless, working his night shifts, thinking he's building our future. If he only knew. Soon, baby, Mark replied. Once the accounts are transferred, we'll have everything we need. Your husband's construction company is doing well. The divorce settlement should set us up nicely. Margaret let out a strangled sob and rushed from the room, her hands covering her face. The sound of her heels on the hardwood floor echoed like gunshots. Robert stood rigid, his face turning darker with each message that scrolled past. You even joked about it? I continued, scrolling through their conversations. About how I was working overtime to save for the house you'd never live in. About how my crew respected me, never knowing their boss was being played for a fool. The messages about the baby are particularly interesting, Helen added, her voice like ice. Want to tell them about that, Laura? Or should I? Laura's face, already pale, went almost gray. Helen, please, not that. But Helen was merciless. 2 months pregnant. But not by my husband, the timing's wrong. And not by Alex either. Isn't that right, Laura? There's someone else, isn't there? Someone neither of us knew about. The room erupted in gasps. Dr. Anderson dropped his coffee cup, dark liquid spreading across the carpet like a stain. Robert's fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. You! Robert's voice shook with rage and grief. You're carrying another man's child while plotting to steal from your husband? The man who's worked night shifts for years to give you everything? Who sat with you through med school? Who supported your career? He turned to face the wall, unable to look at his daughter. Your mother and I raised you better than this. We thought we knew who you were. Daddy, please. Laura stepped toward him, but he held up his hand. Don't. The word cut through the room like a blade. Don't call me that. My daughter wouldn't do this. My daughter wouldn't betray her family, her husband, her own soul like this. The messages continued scrolling on the screen, each one another nail in the coffin of Laura's carefully constructed lies. Messages about meeting other men in different hotels, about laughing at how trusting I was, about plans to drain our accounts and disappear. And still, I hadn't shown them the worst part yet. Laura stumbled toward me, mascara trailing down her cheeks, looking nothing like the confident woman who'd laughed about deceiving me on that radio show. Her perfectly manicured fingers, paid for with our joint account, reached for my hands. Alex, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. We can work through this. I made a terrible mistake. I was confused, lost. But I love you. I've always loved you. Behind her, Helen let out a bitter laugh. Mrs. Mitchell shook her head slowly, years of neighborhood barbecues and shared holidays crumbling to dust. Dr. Anderson studied his shoes, unable to watch his protégé's complete moral collapse. I gently pulled my hands away from her grasp. From my pocket, I withdrew an envelope, cream-colored, with a Balinese resort's logo embossed in gold. You know what the hardest part of working night shifts was, Laura? My voice was soft, almost gentle. Not the exhaustion, not missing family dinners, not even sleeping alone. I opened the envelope slowly. It was keeping secrets from you. Good secrets. The kind of secrets a husband should keep from his wife. I pulled out 2 first-class tickets to Bali, the gold lettering catching the light. Remember last month, when you were showing me that travel magazine? The villa with the private pool overlooking the ocean? The one you said you dreamed about since medical school? Laura's eyes fixed on the tickets, her hands trembling as she reached for them. I held them just out of reach. I bought them 3 months ago. Been working extra shifts at the site to afford the premium package. The private villa, the couple's massages, the sunset dinner cruise you always talked about. I pulled out more papers from the envelope. Even arranged for Dr. Anderson to approve your leave. He's been helping me plan it for months. Her father, who had been standing silently by the window, turned back to watch, his face a mask of pain and disappointment. The villa has this amazing master bedroom, I continued, my voice still eerily calm. Floor-to-ceiling windows, king-sized bed with rose petals scattered every evening. The exact room you were looking at in that magazine. I paused, letting the words sink in. The same magazine you left open on our bed the night you went to meet Mark at the Oakwood Hotel. Laura swayed slightly, her designer dress, another gift from me, suddenly seeming too tight. Alex, I didn't know. No, you didn't. You were too busy planning your escape with Mark to notice how many extra hours I was putting in. Too occupied with your secret meetings to see the travel brochures I had to hide every time you came home unexpectedly. Too wrapped up in your affairs to realize I was building your dream vacation, piece by piece. I slowly tore the tickets in half, the sound sharp in the silent room. I had it all planned for next month. Your birthday. I was going to surprise you at that Italian restaurant. You know, the one you've been taking your lovers to. Had a whole speech prepared about how you deserved the world. The torn pieces of the tickets fluttered to the floor like fallen leaves. Laura made a small, broken sound as they landed. But that's not the biggest surprise I had planned for you, Laura. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulling out one final envelope. Would you like to know what else I've been working on? You see, Laura, I said, pulling out a thick manila envelope. While you were planning your future with Mark, I was planning too. Just not the future you expected. The divorce papers made a soft sound as they hit the coffee table. Clean, professional letterhead stating in stark black and white the end of 8 years of marriage. Laura's eyes fixed on them like a deer in headlights. Everything's there, I continued quietly. The hotel receipts, the bank statements, the security footage, even the radio show recording. My lawyer's been building the case for weeks. Did you know adultery and financial infidelity can significantly impact divorce settlements in our state? Helen stepped forward, placing her own envelope next to mine. And here are mine, Mark. I filed this morning. Laura's hands shook as she reached for the papers. But what about our history? Everything we built together? You mean like the house you and Mark were planning to claim in the divorce? Or the company accounts you were going to drain? I shook my head slowly. Check page 6, Laura. I've already frozen all our joint accounts. And remember that investment portfolio you never paid attention to during our financial meetings? I've documented every penny. Her father stepped forward, his voice heavy with emotion. Laura, when I walked you down the aisle, I thought I was giving my little girl to a man who would treasure her. Instead, you've become someone I don't even recognize. I picked up my jacket from the chair, the same chair where we used to spend Sunday mornings reading together. The movers will come tomorrow for my things. I've already rented a new place. You can keep the house for now, but the court will decide its fate along with everything else. As I turned toward the door, I paused. You know what's ironic? All those nights you thought I was just working construction, I was actually taking business courses. Wanted to surprise you by expanding the company, building something bigger for our future. For the family we talked about having. I reached the door and turned one last time. The room had fallen completely silent, Laura standing frozen among the scattered evidence of her betrayal. Her parents grieving the daughter they thought they knew. Our friends and neighbors witnessing the end of what they thought was a perfect marriage. Goodbye, Laura. I hope whatever you were looking for was worth everything you're losing. The door closed behind me with a quiet click, far too gentle a sound for the end of 8 years. As I walked away, I could hear Laura's sobs echoing through the door, but my heart had finally hardened against that sound. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Looking back now, I realized there were signs I chose to ignore. The sudden password changes on her phone. The mysterious work emergencies that only happened on date nights. The way she stopped sharing small details about her day. Love shouldn't make you blind. It should make you wise enough to protect both your heart and your future. Remember, trust should be earned continuously, not just given once at the altar. Sometimes the greatest act of love is being strong enough to walk away. Write your opinion in the comments if you would have done this. It's really important to me. Don't forget to like the story so we know you like it, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our new videos. And the next story will be even more interesting. There's a twist that will definitely surprise you. So turn on your notifications and stay tuned. See you in the next story.